Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
Back to the program, Mr. Jacob Bundrick. He is a policy analyst at the Arkansas Center for Research and Economics at the University of Central Arkansas. Jacob, welcome back, my friend.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me on. I'm happy to hit leadoff today on a busy day for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great that Donald Trump just, has been talking about tax policy and rolling this out, because you have written a paper that I think is very useful, very beneficial about the state of Arkansas, state taxes and manufacturing productivity, a case study of Arkansas. And so I have a few questions about this paper, but what led you to want to write about this topic?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. This is a paper that was published in the academic journal called the Journal of Regional Analysis and Policy, and it's kind of right in the bread and butter of ACRE, where we want to look at the data in Arkansas and see what policies can help Arkansans become better. And so when I first got to ACRE a few years ago, we had kind of been looking at some different manufacturing data, some different data in different industries around the state, and we really noticed that Arkansas was lagging behind in a lot of different categories in manufacturing. So we'd seen less growth in the real dollar value of manufacturing, so less growth in GDP. We'd seen a greater decline in manufacturing share of GDP than our neighbors. We'd seen a faster rate of manufacturing job loss than our neighbors. And so we really got interested in this idea. And one thing that we found that we thought might be a root cause of it is that we've seen slow growth in labor productivity, which basically means manufacturing output per manufacturing employee.
Okay. And I think you've done a great job here pointing out, what the issue is and really some of the consequences for not, making attempts to try to fix this problem. On page 21 of your paper, talks about the high tax burdens here in Arkansas. They're costing the state almost $2 billion a year in manufacturing GDP. So do you have any idea what taxes specifically, Jacob, are preventing this nearly $2 billion in manufacturing GDP?
Yeah, so the first thing that we did is just kind of look at the total tax burden as a percentage of state GDP to give us an effective tax rate. So GDP can be thought of as productivity, so your tax collections are a nice, easy way to look at what your effective tax rate are. Gets around the complications of the different tax structures in states. And so we found this negative relationship between the total tax burden and manufacturing productivity, and we thought, wow, that's interesting. It's in line with what other literature suggests, but we thought it would be more useful to look at the different tax components. So there's really four big ones, right? You think of corporate income taxes, individual income taxes, property taxes, and sales and use taxes. And what we found is that two of those taxes have are the primary drivers of this negative relationship, and those are the corporate income tax and the sales and use tax.
Okay, so the corporate tax and the sales and use tax. Okay, so you say that those are the biggest tax burdens right now that you think is correlated in preventing that $2 billion in manufacturing output that we're not seeing.
That's what our evidence would suggest based on our estimates, using the empirical techniques that we did.
Wow. Okay, so what specific rates need to be cut? Have you thought about that in terms of how much do we need to see? What rates need to be cut, and then how much increased manufacturing GDP? Go ahead.
Yeah, so the way that we went about thinking about this is kind of twofold. One was we looked at our bordering states with a few other states thrown in there like Kansas and Alabama, and we said, okay, one way to look at it is what would happen if we picked the median state and cut our tax rate to the median state's rate, and that was Missouri. So we can go through our using our estimations from the empirical model. We can arrive at a number and say, hey, we're losing about I'm losing the number here. We're losing about $1.6 billion in manufacturing GDP as a result of having such a high tax burden. And then another way that we did that is just looking at the average tax burden in the region, saying, if we just move to the average, became more competitive in our region. We're not looking at going to zero.
Mm-hmm.
We're not looking at going to 1%. We're just trying to be average. What would that bring us to? And that, running through that estimation puts us at increasing GDP, manufacturing GDP, by about 1.5 billion to 1.6 billion, assuming all else is equal.
Gosh. So, I mean, we're essentially, what we're hearing, folks, we're talking with Jacob Bundrick from the Arkansas Center for Research and Economics. So we're hearing that the tax burden in Arkansas is prohibiting, manufacturing from being able to produce more. It's inhibiting their productivity. And you've mentioned the sales tax rates. You've mentioned the corporate income tax rates. So why do you think that ranks as the most significant factors, and when we're talking about what's hurting manufacturing? Why is it the corporate tax? Why is it the sales tax?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because that's always the next step in one of these analyses is to think about what's causing that. And so the corporate income tax is fairly easy to explain. There's a lot of literature on this, and what it suggests is that the corporate income tax raises the cost of user capital. And basically what that means is corporations end up investing less than they would have. When we tax them, it actually raises the cost of capital to them, so they're less inclined to invest in more capital, which make people more productive, and so we end up with less output. The sales tax is interesting, and it's a little bit counterintuitive than what you'd expect. But we suspect there's some other channels that's working through. Most states exempt manufacturing inputs and business-to-business inputs or sales from the sales tax. So you wouldn't really expect that the sales tax would increase the cost of capital. Arkansas used to tax the input of business machinery, but we got rid of that in the last session when we flipped InvestArc and exempted that sales tax. So that's a natural step for a next study, is looking at what is the root cause of sales tax affecting manufacturing productivity.
Yeah. On page 17, you discuss in your paper about how an inventory tax and a capital stock tax, you mentioned these, and I'm not really familiar with this. Can you explain to us what those are and what their impact is on the manufacturing productivity? And can we reform these?
Yeah, certainly. So an inventory tax is essentially a property tax on a business's inventory. So you think about someone who's going through, or someone who has a manufacturing facility. They have these raw materials. They have halfway finished goods. They have some finished goods that are sitting in the warehouse. So we actually apply a property tax to that inventory. Wow. And that's problematic because it distorts business decisions, right? So you think about, we don't have an Amazon warehouse around here because we would tax all that inventory that's in that warehouse, right? And
hang on. Now that's interesting. Jacob,
about how much to produce, how much to hang on to.
Yeah.
And we don't really want them thinking about those decisions. We want them thinking about how do they make a better product, which markets do they need to get to, things of that nature. So we're distorting their process there.
Well, I want to mention,
it's also called a franchise tax.
Yeah, Jacob, can you hear me?
It's a tax on a business's wealth. All right. So in a lot of ways, it serves as a duplicate income tax. We already have an income tax. It's not really clear why we would need to tax a business again on top of that. But both of these are really outdated taxes, and we should really think about reforming them.
Yeah, Jacob, can you hear me? Okay.
I can.
Okay. Sorry, I was trying to talk over you. I apologize. You mentioned if Amazon came here, we would be taxing the stuff sitting on their shelves that hasn't been sold yet if they had a warehouse. And there was talk about us trying to get an Amazon warehouse here, maybe using maybe turning a former military base into that sort of thing. And what you've just essentially told us is there's no way they would do that. There's no way they would come here and then be subject to our oppressive tax code.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why businesses make location decisions. It's they got to think about how close they are to their suppliers, to their downstream firms, the workforce they can get. But tax policy certainly plays a role in that, right? And there's certain things that we can control. There's certain things we can't control. We can't help that we're not on the ocean. I would love to move Arkansas to the ocean and go to the beach every day, but that's just not going to change. But tax policy is one of the things that we can change. And when we have these distortive taxes like an income tax, or excuse me, an inventory tax, then yeah, it does play a role in these firms' decisions.
Really good stuff. Okay, let's move. Let's see. Backing up a little bit, over on page 13 of your paper, targeted tax incentives, corporate welfare, alters firm costs in a way that makes less productive firms become low-cost producers. Resources will shift from high-productivity firms to low-productivity firms. This shift decreases overall productivity and economic growth. So that's from the paper. Does this mean that these corporate welfare programs, like, let's say, the Governor's Quick Action Closing Fund, actually hurt current manufacturing?
Well, I just want to put a caveat in there. It's not guaranteed that these incentives will necessarily shift resources from these high-cost producers to these low-cost producers, or these high-productivity firms to these low-productivity firms. But it's a very real chance. And those sometimes have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But it's a very real possibility that happens. In terms of incentives as a whole, whether they help or they hurt, there's an extensive amount of literature on this that suggests that incentives generally don't help the broad economy. We've actually got a few papers in the works right now specifically looking at this. That one of them should be out in the next month or so, and then another one's a little bit down the road. So when those are fine-tuned, I'd love to come on and talk more about those for you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And just kind of wrapping up here, again on 13, economic growth largely stems from productivity increase. That's pretty basic. When people are more productive, like you said earlier, we have more economic growth. So does this mean that government doesn't create jobs? I mean, is that what you would take
That's
from
right.
that?
We should be focused on helping people become more productive. This is almost, if anything is going to be a truth in economics, this is the closest thing to it. That productivity increases economic growth. So we should be looking for ways to help that. It's, things like education, things like not distorting production decisions that might influence how productive firms are able to make their employees. So we should be focusing on productivity.
Yeah. Okay. I know I said last question, but this is the last question. Unrelated to your paper, Jacob. The Donald Trump, in his tax speech today, his proposal, and the Freedom Caucus supports it. I mean, it looks like they're going to get this thing passed. They're going to be eliminating, though, the deductions on state and local taxes. And I was just wondering, I mean, don't you think that could really end up, I mean, now Arkansans, if you're in that top bracket and, paying basically 7%, you're no longer going to be able to deduct that from what you owe the federal government. You have any thoughts on that just initially?
I'd really love to comment on that, but I haven't actually looked at his proposal yet, and then two, I spend most of my day looking at the state policy, so I haven't had a really good chance to look at that and form an opinion on it.
Yeah.
But maybe that's something I'll look at and can get back to you on.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's a big deal. My thought is, good thing that Asa and the Republican-led legislature have spent the last 3 years reforming our tax code. Oh wait. No, they haven't, and we have really high tax rates that now we're not going to be able to deduct off of our federal income tax bill if this goes through as is. Jacob Bundrick, I appreciate it, sir. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate your research and coming on here and sharing it with this great audience.
Yes, sir. I'm always happy to come on and visit with you, Paul.
All righty, Jacob. Be safe. Folks, we're going to take a break. The Liberty Machine rolls on. Back in just a moment.